of a series of special envoys and special representatives on issues such as the Middle East peace process, Sudan, and Afghanistan-Pakistan. Clinton's low-key and at times overly cautious approach is symbolic of the Obama administration's floundering foreign policy, one significantly lacking in coherence and direction. Her underwhelming address to the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington merely reinforced the image of a confused foreign policy and an American leadership hugely uncomfortable with the idea of a United States as the world's only superpower. Lacking in strength and vision, and extraordinarily naive for a post-9/11 world, Clinton's see no evil, hear no evil speech was one of the weakest delivered by a Secretary of State in modern times. It was a speech that could easily have been written by a bureaucrat sitting in Brussels or Turtle Bay, surveying an imaginary world where the United States is merely one of several equal players rather than the most powerful nation on the face of the earth.
Well, the speech seemed pretty naive to me.
The naive principle of engagement lay at the very heart of Clinton's CFR speech. The rising threat from Pyongyang barely mentioned discussion in Clinton's analysis, except for a rather optimistic boast about 2 unanimous Security Council resolutions with real teeth and consequences for North Korea. The Secretary of State pointedly avoided any direct criticism of Kim Jong-il and his tyrannical regime, and made no reference at all to the fact that North Korea had recently fired a range of ballistic missiles and even tested a nuclear bomb. The mass starvation of millions of North Koreans by the regime in Pyongyang was also conveniently swept under the carpet, as was continuing human rights violations by China and Russia. Nor did Clinton directly condemn Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad by name or any other of the country's Islamist rulers for the brutal murder and suppression of protesters on the streets of Tehran following last month's rigged elections. While conceding that she was, quote, appalled by the manner in which the government used violence to quell the voices of the Iranian people, Clinton made it clear she remained firmly committed to direct talks with Tehran over Iran's nuclear ambitions, and emphasized, quote, the importance of offering to engage Iran and giving its leaders a clear choice. There was no reference to what measures the United States and its allies should take against Iran if it failed to halt its uranium enrichment program, thereby neutering any threats of further economic and political sanctions, let alone the potential use of military power. In contrast to her tough rhetoric on the Iranian nuclear issue when she campaigned for the presidency, Hillary Clinton has adopted a remarkably dove-like tone while in office, extending the hand of friendship to a brutal dictatorship elected through ballot rigging and intimidation. Like President Obama, the Secretary of State remained largely silent during the immediate aftermath of the Iranian elections and, in an effort not to offend the Iranian leadership, completely avoided referring to the re-election of Ahmadinejad as fraudulent. This was a cowardly approach, one that significantly undercut America's image as a great nation that will always stand up for the cause of liberty and freedom in the face of tyranny. The Obama administration has made a greater effort than any U.S. administration in history to extend the hand of friendship to unsavory regimes. There is barely a tyranny on the face of the earth that has not been earmarked for engagement, from Tehran to Caracas to Khartoum. The Obama-Clinton doctrine is increasingly defined by a refusal on the part of the administration to take an aggressive stand against despotism and by the relegation of human rights concerns to the bottom of the well of foreign policy issues.
Her new strategy seems inherently dangerous.
There are many dangers inherent in this strategy, including lending the veneer of respectability to dictatorships that crave international acceptance when none is merited. Such an approach will swiftly undermine the activities of opposition movements and non-governmental organizations operating in repressive societies, organizations that rely upon the isolation of their governments within the international community to seek democratic reforms and political change. This doctrine also buys valuable time for regimes such as Iran to advance their nuclear programs and erodes international pressure to strengthen sanctions. Clinton's underwhelming performance so far as Secretary of State is representative of a U.S. foreign policy that projects weakness rather than strength and is leaving the United States increasingly vulnerable in the face of an array of enemies. She has sorely disappointed those who argued that she would toughen the President's position on key international issues, especially the Iranian nuclear threat. The brutal reality is that rather than strengthening Washington internationally, the much-hyped Obama-Clinton doctrine of smart power is an empty shell that masks a strategy for America's decline as a world power. The long-term strength and security of the United States depends ultimately upon strong defenses, including the launch of a global missile defense system, as well as the advancement of economic and political freedom across the globe. America's position as a superpower has been weakened by President Obama and Secretary Clinton's failure to stand up to tyranny, and their rash embrace of odious dictators will ultimately tarnish America's image. An administration that chooses to appease evil rather than confront it will ultimately decline in credibility, both at home and abroad, in turn leaving the homeland more vulnerable to attack. World leadership is not a popularity contest. Rather, it is about making tough decisions and adopting positions that will be met with hostility in many parts of the globe. It is about the assertive projection of American power, both to secure the United States and to protect the free world. Such leadership is often a lonely and unenviable task that at times will require the use of maximum force against America's enemies. The United States needs stronger leadership on the world stage from both the White House and the State Department, including a tougher stance towards America's foes from a Secretary of State whose voice is unusually meek and silent. This is a time for America to project its might and confront its adversaries, not to retreat behind a failed strategy of engagement.
Niall Gardner, thanks for being on the Savage Nation. San Diego Jeff, you're up on the Savage Nation. Go ahead, please.
Dr. Savage, it's a pleasure. I just wanted to call in and give a brief testimony of how you've changed my life. And I know there are thousands that have similar stories, but I began listening to you while doing 3 years in the California Youth Authority, which is basically a prison for youth. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I got a Walkman. It's one of the things I was allowed to listen to, and I started listening to your station. And
they let you listen to the Savage Nation? How risky of them. They didn't make you listen to rap music in the California Youth Authority?
That or mariachi music. There were very few choices.
Amazing that they let you listen to talk radio. All right, so did you not have a strong father figure?
I did, but he walked out at 15 when I was 15. All
right, all right, there it goes. So in other words, the radio voice becomes, in a way, sort of the radio father, right?
Correct.
General MacArthur, they gave him a white ticker tape parade through New York City when I was like a kid, 10 years old. And he had just come back from Korea. And I'll never forget, I begged my father to take me in his car to Queens Boulevard so we could watch General MacArthur go underneath on the park on a boulevard in an open car. And I'll tell you the truth, it stood with me for many, many years. He was a hero of mine. Did I know him? No. Did he speak to me? No. Am I General MacArthur? No, that's not the point. Is that we all need role models. We all need something to hold on to in this slippery world that we live in. Savage. The home of the Savage Nation in the belly o' the beast, San Francisco. Talk 910 KNEW and online at 910KNEW.com. The media has all but buried any stories on Iran's election and the resulting protests and government crackdowns. We would be getting zero information if not for the Internet and websites like Facebook and Twitter. Joining us now is James Carafano to discuss the effect that these social networking sites are having on Iran and the way we can still get information, even when the media doesn't want us to know it.
Well, Michael, thanks, as always, for having me on. You know, all I do is spend my days thinking about the stuff that keeps you up at night. I work on all the bad things. So I work on all the national security issues here at the Heritage Foundation. And one of my continuing frustrations is always how the mainstream media doesn't get it. And then we get a call from you guys, and you say, hey, you need to talk about this because you guys focus on the right thing. And this is a great example. You know, everybody remembers the most important film of all time, Jurassic Park. And when the character says, you know, life will find a way. You know, it's the same thing with freedom and democracy. Freedom and democracy will find a way. And what's going on in Iran now is a great example. But, you know, the mainstream media, as soon as Obamacare came up or the next thing, you know, they were off that story in the New York Minute, and people are still in Iran protesting against the government, pushing back. Democracy is trying to get root and grow leaves, and the mainstream media just doesn't give a damn. So one of the things we did in some of our research here at Heritage is we looked at what a lot of people call social networking or Web 2.0. It's basically how people use Twitter and Facebook and you name it, all these different websites to communicate back and forth with each other, and it had a huge part to play play in getting the word out about the Iranian protests both in the country and outside the country. It's an incredibly fascinating case. About a third of Iranians have access to the internet, which is actually the second highest in the Middle East behind Israel.
1/3? What's the percentage like here in the West?
For the West, that's actually a very low percentage. In the United States, for example, 70% of Americans have access and regularly use the internet. And so why was this explosion of people Twittering and Facebooking and blogging and emailing? Well, what happened is there's about a diaspora, a population basically kicked out of the country, or that successfully got away from the Ayatollahs there, of about somewhere between 3 and 5 million that live around the world. Many of them live in the United States, Canada, Brazil, countries with very high access to the internet, and we know about at least 500,000 of them are very active online. So what really happened here is that people in Iran, being very creative and innovative, kind of got the word out to the West, and then the West and the Iranians in the West really got the message out, and this